Hey guys, this is Mike and Colin.
That is me.
I'll do your intro for you. From the ARG Pro Force World team. I bet you're wondering, what are you guys doing here? And just want to say a quick, huge thank you to Jeremy for letting us do his takeover video. This is pre-recorded, so I will actually be in Japan hanging out with him, hopefully getting very drunk.
I won't.
Right.
The rest of the team is there. Team ARG consists of 8 people?
Well, you and Driz, I believe, are the only ones that aren't going.
Oh, Jersey, yeah. But there are a total of 8 people on the team. Which,
6 of them are going. Yep.
Yeah. Not bad. Not bad.
Hey, it's pretty good, actually. There's a reason we're called the Pro Team.
And they rotate on these videos once in a while. You can see when you go to the ARG channel. It's sort of, you can tell based on the titles of videos usually how many people are on there. If the title is 2 dudes, then it's us 2 dudes.
That's
if
us,
it's not
yeah.
titled that, then it'll have a random member from the ARG team. So it's kind of a cool variety there.
If it shows that there's 6 people on there, run.
It's chaos.
It is chaos, but it was fun chaos. But anyway, that's enough about our team. We're here for Jeremy's channel, and we're here to talk about sort of the competitive aspect of Force of Will, because we're, the pro team here. We decided to give you something a little bit less, less just whatever out there. We want to talk about the history of this game and our favorite decks from this game's history.
Competitively.
And, yeah. These are decks that have top-8'd in the past, that have just stood out to us among everything else that is topped, in the same area that they have. And it's just, we're going to go over them. We're going to have a nice little visual of them. Gotcha logs over here, or here. I don't know where the Colin's going to
Yeah.
Yeah, wherever that was.
We're not in Japan yet. We read left to right.
Yes, exactly. No dubs. So I don't know which one of us wants to start. I think yours is a little more topical with current format, right?
Yes, it's probably one of the most recent of the top 18 decks. So like I said, we picked our favorite that was had top date at some point. I wasn't here pre Alice Cluster, so I can't speak to that. And I'll put the disclaimer that I feel like there was a deck sometime in the post LEL world of love and happiness that was amazing. But there were so many decks, so many things that happened in there that's just hard for me to remember. So I'll put that disclaimer there. That being said, one of the deck that really stood out to me, and I had mentioned this to Mike, that there are like some power themes that could probably be worked out as far as like there's 1 or 2 themes that are a little bit strong in there, but overall I really enjoyed the mechanics and gameplay of the lockout version of the Time Spinning Witch deck. The version that just its main point is to run and play the lockout card and bring in Mosasaurus to lock you out, and swing in and just attempt to win by smashing a giant well against your face, essentially, while you just sit there and pass turn because you can't untap and stuff like that. And I just really love sort of, yes, it's still winning by smashing into your face, but I love roundabout ways. Maybe it has a well, so it reminds me of, it technically has a well, so it reminds me of Well Lord maybe from Pokemon, which was my favorite random deck that came out of nowhere. And so this kind of reminds me of it, where it's not winning by like canceling your stuff or clearing your field or anything. It's winning by making you just not play. If you're not properly prepared for it, you just don't play, and then they'll just swing at you with something that usually is pretty easy to block or kill or anything, because it doesn't have barrier. It has 1,000 defense, which is high, but it's a high cost card, so it's usually hard to get into and all this stuff. And it does it all by filtering the time wheel through this statue edition, which I thought was a really smart idea. And just all these different things. I just love the roundabout way technically that it goes about trying to win the game.
Yeah, anything specific on the actual deck that you're highlighting here? Whose deck was this, by the way? Do you happen to know?
Yes. This one I'm specifically referencing, I think, was one of the first instances we saw it, and it was, well, shoot. this might not be one of the first instances, because I pulled up the Asia Championship in Guangzhou, and I do not think that was the first instance of it. But it was the first instance, I believe, where it won first place. And so that was the list I grabbed. So I apologize. It doesn't have the name, because that was a weird one where we're having trouble getting information at all from that one, if I remember correctly. What were your thoughts on the Time Spinning Witch deck?
I personally hate getting locked out. That's not my idea of a fun game, but I do see the merits of the deck. And I think that with certain, tweaks to the balance and tweaks to certain cards, maybe the deck could be, a little more fun with lockout, if that's a way to do things. I think Dinosaur Surfacing is a poorly designed card. I'm going to definitely throw that out there. Mosasaurus should definitely be printed on its own, because it still contributes to the deck's win condition, but not on turn 3 sometimes.
Yeah, and but I will say, if you know what the deck is, usually, like, there's a way around it. For example, this one, its main win con is the Mosasaurus, and trying to get into that. It doesn't have, technically, real win cons outside of that. So the easiest way to counter this deck is just to not tap your stones and leave them up to counter what your opponent does. It's a similar situation I ran into when I went against a deck that was running the Umar combo at the GP, and they beat me game 1 because I genuinely did not know they were running the Umar combo, because it was using a different ruler than I would have expected. It was smart. But game 2, all I had to do was just leave my stones up and wait for them to play the card, and then I could cancel it. And as soon as I did that, I was just able to win the game after that. And so it's just a matter of, you don't even have to play, you just don't have, or you just have to keep your stones untapped against it, and odds are you're running Lorite or something like that. Maybe not in the post rotation world, but because of that less access to dual colors. But at least in here, it felt kind of counterable, at least. But I agree, yeah, being locked out, for the person being locked out, isn't quite as fun. And the fact that it is as consistent as it is probably not the best. But the idea of the deck, and especially if it came onto the scene, and maybe even if it died off right after it came onto the scene, it still would have been something cool to see, I think.
I can agree with that. And I think, if anything, it is the best time for Witch to come out while Lorite is still in the game and still as powerful as it is. Like, going forward, I think this is actually the reason I think Lorite can be banned in Wanderer, because people were complaining about Witch. Witch got hit a little bit with the loss of Apollo, but also in that format you have something like Glimpse of Kaguya, where it just straight up cancels something. You have stuff that removes things from the game, like Evil Elemental Uprising. Same thing as it happens in New Frontiers as well. There's just a lot of stuff that, first of all, hurts Distortion of Time, and second of all, also helps to hurt Mosasaurus a little bit in the case of Lorite. So there's a lot of stops and a lot of push and pull with this deck. It's a very, I would say, polarizes the meta a little bit, but not very hard, I would say.
Do you think, are you talking about in the context of when the deck came out, or do you think it currently...
A little of both, because I think when it first came out, the deck was far inferior to Sherry, as most decks were. And the thing that Witch did really, really well was lock out aggro decks from even getting close to Sherry. Because most of the time, if you're facing like Gil or Scheherazade, you play an aggressive deck and you try to rush them down and beat them before they can get their mid-range kind of late-game control options, which just ruins aggro. Like, you tap your stones out, you swing face, and then your opponent's just like, alright, you're going to be stuck in that position for the next 3 turns.
Minimum.
Yeah. And there's nothing they can do to stop it.
And ideally, it'd be technically, well, I guess, yeah, 3 turns-ish, as far as having at least three stones tapped. You're probably looking at 4 turns or so, yeah. Yeah, definitely hurts. And what the problem is, yeah, it hurts aggro decks, but and this is where I was talking about the power level, is because of how it works, it just affects every deck regardless of how you're playing, unless you don't play anything, like I mentioned, by not tapping stones and waiting to counter it.
The only way to beat this deck is to not play the game.
Yeah, go on. I'll wait.
I've got a little bit of hatred, but that's okay. Some choices in here are very interesting, like the Light of Transmigration, the Dreams of Juliet, Dawn of the Earth. That's splashing white just for those tools is pretty crazy, but it does make sense. And I see that he actually sides into the bidding off 3 blue-green stones that will actually let him play that null page down there, which is a nutty inclusion.
like the fact that you could have your opponent tap down. You have the light of blah 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 as sort of a low, like if you have.
Sorry, the light of what now?
Don't worry about it. So if you have the 5 wool up, instead of playing Mosasaurus to lock your opponent out, you pay 2, and you still get to lock your opponent out, assuming you have Mosasaurus on the field, and you have the remaining 3 to remove maybe the one threat your opponent finally played, and maybe it's the most viable threat, and it's now removed for the rest of the game. So even if they get stones untapped, their most viable threat is now gone, and stuff like that. You basically own the game.
And not only that, Light of Transmigration has a remnant. So
that's
it's
true.
Another lockdown.
That explains why they only run 1. Because it's not something you want to be pulling into a lot, but you just want to pull into it once.
It's very... Those, like, the 1-ups in this deck are very, very win more, but if you're playing Witch, you're allowed to try and win more.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just thought it was cool. I did not expect the consistency out of that deck that it ended up having when we were first seeing bits of it.
Yeah, very neat.
So your deck is we jump back in time a little bit.
Oh yeah, this goes back to immediately after the release of Ingolf 3, like right before RDE dropped. Take a trip back in the time machine with me before her unfortunate untimely banning, and we go back to the original mono white Lumia deck that top 8'd. I forget which GP was at. I cannot for the life of me remember. But it was Stephen Weigelt's build, and it was just, as soon as I saw that thing played, I was so excited when I saw this deck. He actually did a video profile of it where he said, all right, the first things first, the rules Lumia, and here's the stone deck. It's 20 white stones. And it's just like, as soon as I had it, I'm like, oh, that's sweet. Because he was, I think, one of the first people to take this deck and do anything like big with it. I'm not sure if he's the one who originally built it. I'm not sure if he's originally the one who, came up with this concept. I'm sure a lot of people have been toying around with this. But the Soul into Shining Strike combination, where you play Soul on turn 2, you get your stone, you tap that stone, Shining Strike, tap the Soul, and draw a card so you can't trip that through. End of turn, Lumia flickers, flicker the Soul out, flicker it back in, get another stone, and set up for next turn. And then on turn 3, you have an Arthur Pendragon at the ready. Like, the things you could do with this deck are just obscene. And I really, really love the concept of it. Or some extra options he had in there. Obviously, this was back when Regalia and Rulers Moria were, like, the big things. Like, Feetsing Wyber was, like, the deck. And obviously with Hook and everything. First of all, this deck was insanely good against the Feetsing Castling deck that was got popular at this point. Because Hook can't touch mono stones. And that killed it. So there's that.
That's true.
Not only that, the deck played 3 Bedivere. Now, if you don't know, Bedivere, when it enters the board, is a 7/7 for 3. When it enters, you remove something with 1,000 or more attack from the game. He would, on his opponent's turn, after they'd, done the Feasting Nut and just put, like, 2 Gwybers or a Gwyber and a Titania on the board, he would play Bedivere, remove one of them, Shining Strike it, tap it, draw a card, end of turn, flicker, remove the other threat.
Yeah.
And that was just like, who thinks of this? It was so cool. And then he sided Kaguya so that he could tap J-Rollers if he was facing something aggressive. And this is... Okay, so I think I mentioned this before to you before we started this video. This was the last deck that had Levitine in it that was fair. And what I mean by that is that Levitine was actually used for its original intents and purposes, and not for, just cheating out a Gwyber or OTKing with Priscia, or even doing the Cheshire Cat's assistance combo, which was just
good times.
Just regalia garbage. Well, this is the last time that Levitine was used, for the fact that it was a card that just said, your Dribble against Swiftness, which didn't matter for Lumia, so that's fine. Banish it to give her Imperishable, probably just for going back to her flip side and trying to do things again. But the big thing is that you're mono white, so you can't Judgment Lumia without holding your Energize. But then when you have Levitine, you play the Levitine, say you get it off of like Lumia Saint of Creation, you remove 3 from the game, 2 of them are 0 cost Regalia, so you just play them out, and then you use that Levitine that you just got, discard another copy, produce the fire, flip. So the Imperishable barely mattered because you already needed to jump through hoops to even get to the Judgmented side. It was just such a crazy, weird thing. And just... And he played Gwyber with like 8 1-drops in the deck. Who are you? Who are you to do this? To make this... I can gush about this deck all day. This is like one of my favorite decks of all time.
Yeah,
this is literally my favorite upset competitive deck I've ever seen.
I always loved Shining Strike as a card, and so I love the idea of basically using it essentially as, like I always say, if there's a card that costs 1 and you draw a card, that's already a halfway decent card. It's pot agreed, essentially. So any effect it has after that is just, icing on the cake. So the fact that this rests something is great, and the obvious use is resting a resonate your opponent has. But the obvious, and I'm sure other people did before this, but using it inside of the Lumia deck to rest stuff, is obviously a great idea. But being able to think in your head of like, okay, now I have a 1 cost that I draw a card, and any resonator I put into the field, I get whatever effect it says twice, just always. And so with that in your head, now you could start thinking of different ideas and different combos and stuff like that. And so you come up with the Soul Envoy of Light, which I think is super cool, a super good idea of just like, because usually Soul Envoy of Light, and the reason it drops off a bit outside of Lumia is because you put on the field, you get the stone, and then he sits there, and it's just sort of an average thing. But inside of Lumia, he's an engine. He keeps giving and giving and giving as long as he doesn't die. And if he dies, it's because your opponent exerted resources to kill him, in which case you still win. You got all your value out of him anyways. As soon as you flickered him, you got more than your value out of him. So there's cool things like that. And then, like you said, throwing in Bedivere of like something you wouldn't think of because it's 3 costs, and it removes 1,000 or more attack from the game, but it's situational, and if it hits, it's still a 3 cost 7/7 in the field. But looking at the lens of, no, it's 4 cost 7/7, draw a card and remove 2,000s or more from the game. All of a sudden that became just like a ridiculously good card when you look through it, the framework of this ruler with this card, and you combine those costs and effects, and you filter that through, is that a good effect now, stuff like that. So I think that's pretty cool.
I think this deck is one of the first times that people were, like, obviously when Lumia was revealed, people said, let's try and find anything that has an enter the board effect and find a way to just break it. Hence we got Lumia Hook, obviously. But this is one of the first decks where people thought, instead of making just like a deck of bombs, how do we just find a pretty decent enter effect and just capitalize on it for as much as we can, and find some other cards that also capitalize on it the same way. It's the first time we'd ever seen something to that degree, and I think that's really where that good design comes in.
Well, it's the difference of like, I'm gonna sound like a weirdo, but I was looking up videos to try and figure out now I'm regretting saying this, what car to buy in Grand Theft Auto, because I had a certain amount of money. I was like, I don't know which one to get, which one's faster and all that. So I looked at a video of 2 that I was looking at, and they just did a side-by-side race of them. And they went, and the first car was just like, zoom, and just shot off and left the other in the dust. And the video goes, and all of a sudden the other car's just like, and just passes it and leaves it. Like, the other card just shoots off at the beginning, but it can't maintain that speed. The other card takes longer to go, but in the long term it works better. And so this kind of reminds me that when you brought up the bomb theme, the other ones are like, here's hook, here's this, and it does this. But because of that, you kind of might lose out on a little bit of the consistency, or especially hook related. As soon as you go against a deck like this with monostones, you're dead in the water. This is good against any deck because of how it works, and it's a steady engine. It builds upon itself no matter what hand you are drawing and different things like that. It just steadily works throughout the game without giving ground, and without necessarily taking ground until it needs to take ground and stuff like that with how it works, which I think is like you mentioned, it's an engine that capitalizes on the effects that people were ignoring because they were just going for the bombs.
Yep, exactly. It's just such a good, concise engine there. Also, fun fact, I was looking through this. Nothing reiterates this point even more than saying that there are no Celestial Wing Seraphs in this deck. Like, the card that is broken with Lumia's ability, aside from Hook, obviously, but the fact that we didn't have any of her in here, didn't have the biggest bombs that they had are Gwyber and Arthur, which neither of them have enter abilities. It's literally just like Lumia is not meant to be the win condition. Lumia is meant to adhere to a higher purpose, and that was so cool.
Well, I feel like it's the way they meant it to be, as just a catalyst for different engines, and to answer like them, like you said, they don't run Hook because that gets rid of consistency, and I think it's the same thing for Celestial Wind Seraph, because Celestial Wind Seraph by default becomes less consistent the minute you draw one of the targets that are in your deck. It immediately becomes, even if it's technically, I guess, not less consistent because you search your deck, but you now technically have a not very good card in your hand. You don't want to have that card in your hand. So it takes away from that sort of just constantly humming engine. You might have a sputter, whereas I feel like this is more just a better smooth ride overall by taking away what would otherwise be a minimum of 5 or 6 slots at minimum for that Celestial to work correctly. And there's the just statistical odds that combo could just kill itself if you have the worst hand in the world at the beginning of the game.
Yep, and I'm sure that happens. I think we've exhausted just about everything in this deck, but the last thing that I want to go over about it, I was actually rewatching the video profile he did on it, and he said that his top 8 losses were to his top cuts losses. He mentioned something about facing both Alex Blandon and Ryan Miles. So this deck's got a pretty decent track record. He's like, yeah, I lost some bad misplays that I did, and it just made me think, like, in a vacuum, if just like every possible optimal play was picked while he was piloting this deck, how far would this thing have gone? And that's something that I love sitting on and thinking of.
Yeah. No, it's it's definitely, it's from the era of anything was possible, that golden time.
Yep, immediately after Vingolf 3, just so much ingenuity popping out at that time.
Yeah, like things that you didn't think of came out, things you thought were dead came back, things that you knew were going to win were still winning. Like, there was nothing excluded in that time, and I feel like it's a deck that was good, but it's different than what you would have seen, and it's utilizing all these different tools. Like, it's a nice little microcosm of everything that was going on during that time.
The fact that Fox was at full power at that time and just was not dominant in the slightest is such a good testament to how well balanced that entire portion of this game was.
Yeah. And that leads to the well, I guess it'll be too much of a tangent, but I'll just say that, like you said, that Fox was at full power and it wasn't in there. And when the new set came out, those other decks didn't become less powerful. Fox didn't necessarily become more powerful, but you had Prisha come out, which was a god, and so it pushed all these other decks out. And because of how Fox worked, Fox was able to maintain itself against Prisha. And so even though all these other decks could maintain themselves against Fox, Prisha pushed them all out. And so because one ruler essentially completely changed the meta, because nothing could beat it. It's sort of this weird thing you could see happen where as soon as that ruler came out, the other rulers and decks didn't become less strong. Rotation hadn't happened yet, and Fox didn't become stronger. It just everything paled in comparison to that. And Fox, which lost to these other decks, didn't immediately lose to Prisha, so just by default it came up second. So
I think the best analogy to put here is that one of the big things that kept Fox in line for a while was Abdul. And Abdul was just like good against Fox, good against Lumia Hook, good against feats in castling, going with the Alice's castling build that tried to cheat in like early hooks. All of that lost to Abdul. Once Percy came out, that deck didn't get touched by Abdul.
Yeah.
Abdul does nothing against the OTK.
Yeah.
Abdul does nothing against any portion of that.
Because you have a card
against everything else. Yep.
Yeah, it's a card that's good against everything and a complete dead draw against the most powerful deck. So any deck that is trying to do that to automatically dies off, which is, yeah, you could. It's just that withering effect of sadness.
Yep.
What
can you do? Welcome to the meta.
Maybe it'll change going forward. We'll find out. You've got some high hopes, so we'll see what happens at Worlds.
High hopes. New Valhalla's balance has been really, really good so far. I think, the set self-contained obviously has some really, really powerful stuff that is meant to be used in tandem in the current format, and I think that New Valhalla itself is a little bit imbalanced, but New Valhalla going into New Frontiers without Scheherazade and just kind of going into this new territory is really, really cool. I'm going to be experimenting a lot because I should be, because Worlds.
Hopefully.
So, yeah, I'll try and find the right balance. But anyway, I think that's all I've got to say about this. I gushed enough about Mono White Lumia to settle the past 2 years it's been around. Any closing remarks, sir?
No, just yeah. Obviously, there's a lot of cool decks and stuff like that. It's just sort of. I think these decks are also representative of the formats and times that they're in, which is pretty cool. Yeah, like I mentioned, it's the microcosm of that post LEL Vingo 3 world, and I think mine both the power structure and the interaction is pretty indicative of that tail end of Rhea cluster, how things played out, not necessarily just with Time Spain Witch, but kind of how Sherry worked in a way of where your opponent couldn't play or do stuff, essentially. So it's all kind of indicative there. But I'll say, yeah, if we're closing up, thanks to Jeremy and Ruler School for having us on their Takeover week. It was pretty awesome.
Guys. This was super fun. I think both of us did this last year, right?
Yes, separately.
Yep. Back when we weren't the ARG boys.
And I mean, I'm on another video that's on this exact Takeover week as well.
Glutton punishment.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see what the reaction is to some of my opinions on this video and that video. What if there's any differences?
Sure to dislike it.
That's fine. That's fine, I guess. But if you guys want more content like this, like I said, we usually do. If it's just him and I, we have Two Dudes Talking videos, which over on the ARG channel, and then we have various entities from Brandan Bremont, Dylan Hunt, and occasionally other people.
Blandon, Miles. Never Driz, though. Driz doesn't show up with us.
Yeah, just Miles, mostly Ryan Miles, kind of, sort of. And then we've gotten a guest appearance from Blandon.
Yeah, a guest appearance. He's on the team. He's the captain.
Oh, captain, my captain.
Oh, captain, my captain.
But yeah, thanks you guys for watching.
Thanks again for watching. Go like and subscribe to us. Like and subscribe to Ruler School if you haven't already. If you haven't already, I don't know how you're watching this right now, because you should have already clicked that button by now.
And hopefully you'll be able to see Mike on the stream, which I think is being streamed here or on the main Force Wiltshire channel. I actually don't know.
I think it'll be here. I want to say so. Hopefully you don't see me streaming on there, because if I'm not streaming, it means I'm winning.
Does it?
Yeah.
Oh, I meant playing on the stream, like playing.
Oh, jeez. Jeremy wanted me to come up for commentary, but if I'm up for commentary, that means that I did not do well.
All right.
All right. Take care, guys.